Back in Season 7, we began to see our first instances of mages being used in bot lane on a regular level. While not unheard of prior, marksmen almost entirely dominated that role during that time frame. Any case of a mage taking the role of the quote-unquote AD carry would most certainly not fall within conventional strategy. But in light of adding more inclusivity and champion pool diversity across all roles, the usage of AP bot laners has become more commonly accepted over the years. Units like Karthus, Veigar, Seraphine, Ziggs, and so on are now occasionally seen down there, along with marksmen themselves opting for AP builds in the event their team is stacking heavy attack damage on the other side of the rift. Based on this, one would assume that more battle mages will find gainful employment in that field, considering the subclass is known for possessing DPS on a level comparable to marksmen, notably Cassiopeia, whose skin ostensibly looks as if it was intended to be the hypothetical example of an AP carry right next to Ryze. We all know about Ryze's complicated past, but what about Cassiopeia? Widely regarded as a hyper carry with extreme pressure and area control, one has to wonder why she's not seen down in bot lane. For that matter, it's unlikely to see her in top or even mid lane as of late, so for today's episode we'll be investigating why no one plays Cassiopeia. Just a quick announcement though, as per usual, most of you should be watching this around lunchtime, so let me bring you the good stuff. I'm being sponsored again by Factor 75 to give everyone something nice to eat. As you know, Factor 75 is a household brand on this channel, but for my new viewers out there, it's a meal prep service that delivers hand-cooked meals right to your door. At any point in time, they have a weekly menu of 35 options that cover a wide range of dietary habits. Keto, vegetarian, vegan, high protein, low calorie, the whole 9 yards. Plus up to 60 add-ons. You can do things like snacks, beverages, and smoothies. Factor's meals are significantly higher in quality than the random microwave dinners you find at grocery stores, but you can prep them all the same. Just 2 minutes and they're ready to eat. I'm sure for many people, myself included, springtime is cutting season to prepare for the summer, so if you're looking to control your calories and portions, this is the best way to do it. You could set your plan to give you anywhere between 4 to 18 meals per week, along with pausing or rescheduling your deliveries whenever. Definitely recommend Factor. I've had their meals myself, and so have the rest of my family apparently, so be sure to use my code VARSMAY50 to get 50% off your first box along with 20% off your next month's order. There's also a link down below for your convenience. Thanks again to Factor for sponsoring the video, but for now, back to talking about why no one plays Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia used to fluctuate a lot back in the day. Following the classified mage rework midway through Season 6, she's had multiple spikes in popularity before petering out from 2020 onwards to where she is today, and it's not hard to see why. When looking at her kit, she has all the makings of a strong champion both in solo queue and pro play. Consistent DPS output in the form of Noxious Blast and Twin Fang slow cooldowns, game warping utility through Miasma and Petrifying Geese, and even the ability to buy 6 completed items due to not having, or rather not being able to purchase boots, while still gaining passive movement speed. With that kind of damage output, area control and pressure, it's no surprise why she's found a lot of success. But it also raises questions over how she could have gone from a 10% pick rate powerhouse to a 2% pick rate champ without a consistent presence in any role. More confusing is that she's by no means a balanced nightmare. On the contrary, she's been one of the more stable champions as of late, receiving few balance changes over the years while maintaining a solid win rate around the 51 percentile. The player base at large considers her a hyper carry, someone to watch out for in the mid to late game as she begins stacking levels and items, which isn't too far from the truth. Back when she had her old passive aspect of the Serpent, she's always carried a reputation for getting more dangerous as time went on, and despite losing that AP stacking in favor of her current passive, she never really lost out on that machine gun damage output she's known for. After all, she's frequently associated with the notion of a magic damage AD carry courtesy of her Twin Fang having a cooldown low enough to effectively match the rate of fire of a basic attack. I would wager the foremost reason behind her lack of widespread representation is because she was designed to have a marksman-like moveset, despite the capabilities of auto attacks differing from that of spellcasts. Picturing the DPS output of a marksman, what is typically the first thing to come to mind? Extreme persistent damage that can be augmented through multiple sources, right? The plethora of ways in which auto attacks gain strength, attack damage, attack speed, crit chance, and on-hit effects are why AD carries go from doing barely any damage to suddenly chainsawing entire teams on their own, hence why they have a category of items reserved just for them. Naturally, exceptions apply, but with auto attacks targeting a single opponent, so too is their DPS. Battle mages are meant to serve as the magic damage counterpart to marksmen, having DPS rivaling the latter as stated before. However, understandably, there's no designated selection of items for its members. They have to buy the same things as everyone else. So how do battle mages make up for not having such a privilege? By tapping into the advantage afforded to abilities, coverage. Battle mages have among the highest AoE coverage out of any class in the game. While they may not reach the same heights in damage against a single target, they can circumvent this by attacking multiple targets, potentially all 5 members of the enemy team. Cassiopeia, despite all her setup tools having solid area coverage, and subsequently the ability to attack multiple members of the enemy team, can only ever concentrate the full force of Twin Fang on a single target, bounding her to the same constraints as a marksman even though she doesn't have the same circumstances that they do. First, the aforementioned ceiling. It's true that ability power is balanced in such a way as to give more strength per unit than attack damage, represented by adaptive force giving proportionally more ability power, along with reaching 1000 plus AD being a freak occurrence that isn't practically attainable, while 1000 plus AP happens pretty often. That being said, point for point, ability power is less valuable than attack damage due to the former having no influence on auto attack damage. This gives Cassio a relatively stronger mid-game, but she tends to lose out against traditional marksmen upon reaching the 4, 5, and 6 item mark, as there's no such thing as magic crit chance or on-hit effects for spells. Twin Fang only gets stronger through flat AP, while auto attacks have the 4 ways I mentioned before: AD itself, attack speed, crit chance, and on-hit effects. You could akin ability haste to attack speed, but I don't think it's quite the same. Second, though auto attacks in the early game are less of a threat in light of players having yet to build the items necessary to ramp up their pressure, an advantage of auto attacks is that they're guaranteed, not just in the sense that they're point and click, but also the fact that it costs nothing to use them. A Caitlyn can be out of mana but still dish out staggering damage from purely her autos and passive alone. Technically, even non-marksmen can do this too. Wukong being out of mana doesn't change the fact that he still has 380 to beat you up with. Cassiopeia's Twin Fang restores mana if it kills the target, allowing her to not gas out just trying to wave clear, but anytime she wants to engage an enemy champion, she'll have to dip into her finite resource pool, blue buff notwithstanding. In lane, this makes trades very committal as she has to apply Noxious Blast, then a few rounds of Twin Fang, draining her of basically half her mana pool if she wants to deal any meaningful damage. This is also the key reason why it's hard to use her in bot lane, one trade combo and she's out of resources. Third, range and coverage. ADC mains often complain about how they can't so much as walk up to auto attack since they get blown up by anyone with a gap closer or ranged pressure, a valid criticism to make in this day and age. Mages are among the few champions capable of exerting pressure at a distance far enough that most marksmen or chancellor gap closers cannot match. When you think of mages that go bot lane, Seraphine, Ziggs, and Karthus, unless they gravely miss position, they can typically attack without fear of retaliation. Combined with most of their abilities being AoE in nature, they can push the wave while damaging lane opponents at the same time. The cast range of Twin Fang is 700, definitely substantial in relation to your standard 550 attack range of an ADC, but 700 is still close enough for most dashes, engage tools, or retaliating fire to be within striking distance of you, a weakness that also extends to mid and top lane. In the mid lane, Cassio struggles against anyone with long range pressure, Lux, Syndra, Victor, Talia, and so on, all of whom can outspace her with ease, forcing her to walk up and take damage before she can do the same to them. Up in top lane, even against melee champions, she has to be careful of their engage potential, as champs like Renekton, Camille, Tryndamere, and so on can close in on her quite easily, not to mention, they can burst her fast while she takes time to shoot down her target. As a result, Cassio often has to resort to building items that, while effective in their own right, aren't necessarily the most conducive to a high DPS build. One of her most common purchases is Rylai's Crystal Scepter, which can aid in giving her better kiting and chasing potential while adding some much needed bulk. She also tends to go Rod of Ages, helping her mana pool while giving more HP and that extra level upon reaching 10 stacks for faster scaling. And lastly, Seraph's Embrace, yet another defense-oriented item that does give a fairly hefty chunk of AP, but is more known for that big lifeline shield. These items make for a deadly combination as, in addition to making her Twin Fangs hurt a lot more, she has more ammo to work with and is also fairly tanky all things considered. Naturally, however, it is a far cry from building say Liandry's, Deathcap, and Malignance, much more DPS oriented. She has no choice though. Cassio is easily prone to taking more damage than other mages who can poke you down, and she needs that mana pool to push waves faster and actually attack enemies. Ordinarily, that wouldn't be too great a sacrifice to make as those items are still very good for damage and scaling, but it can make her feel like it's the items that make the champion, not the champion that makes the items. This leads into the second main reason why people have a hard time getting into her. She's not fully geared towards a field. Marksmen are nothing if not consistent. They have extreme damage and can take over fights very quickly, with their kits being tailor-made to their specific type of playstyle. For instance, Vayne and Kai'Sa have extreme single target damage but low attack range, so they have ways to outplay their opponent, like Vayne's invisibility with Tumble and her Condemn, or Kai'Sa's Supercharge also giving invisibility and her repositioning with Killer Instinct. So while they have to be dangerously close to their target to take them down, they're given the appropriate tools to make them strong 1v1 marksmen. On the flip side, mages tend to be immobile and squishy, making them easy targets to burst down. Doing so is easier said than done though, as they can rely on cover fire and or massive AoE pressure to discourage you from closing in on them, or they can exert a lot of burst damage after they land their setup. Cassiopeia doesn't really have either of those. There's a major disconnect in her kit. She's trying to be a marksman and a mage at the same time, despite the way the two classes exert pressure being fundamentally different. Take her W and Ultimate for example. Both are incredible for teamfights and area coverage, stuff that control mages would kill to have in their own kit, yet her damage is mostly single target like a marksman. You can have the cleanest 5-man stun and ground all of them after, but you still can only attack one of them at a time, whereas if an Orianna lands a shockwave on 5 champs, her Q and W can nuke all 5 of them simultaneously. So the best way to fight Cassiopeia is actually to gang up on her, whereas clumping up against a Vladimir or Victor is exactly what they want, so they can insta-kill all of you at the same time. There's also the issue of Miasma and Petrifying Gaze not being surefire deterrents. Miasma covers a wide area, but it can only ever be used horizontally from her, and it's also better when cast from a far distance. If someone engages on you or dashes behind you, you can miss your W entirely, or on the other hand, if they don't have dashes to begin with, then W is practically just a big slowing field. As for Petrifying Gaze, unless you have a teammate setting apart CC to then prevent them from being able to look away, you can never guarantee the stun from her ultimate. It's not quite the same get off me tool as Orianna ulting herself, Syndra using Scatter the Weak, or Vladimir's Sanguine Pool. This also prevents her from excelling at 1v1s. Duelists are scared to take a 1v1 because they have guaranteed pressure. None of Cassio's pressure is guaranteed. Using Twin Fang on a non-poisoned enemy basically does no damage. But the two ways you can apply poison to a target are both fixed area spells that a person can easily sidestep. If she misses Noxious Blast, that's 3.5 seconds where you basically deal a third of the damage you could be dealing. Miasma can fluctuate from being the single reason you win a fight to being completely useless, while Petrifying Gaze can easily be countered by the opponent simply turning around right before you use it. Cassio cannot reliably depend on Miasma or Petrifying Gaze in disadvantage, so she's not that good of a duelist either. The best situation for her to be in is neutral. Miasma and Petrifying Gaze function at their best when in a neutral state or when Cassiopeia is on the offensive. If you think about it, you want to use Miasma before the opponent burns their dashes. If they engage on you, they've likely already used their mobility spell, or if they're chasing you and you're trying to run away, you'll be running away from Miasma, to which once they leave the poison field, they can go back to attacking you. So the ideal scenario in which to use their W is when you're doing a mix between pursuit and escape, since you want them to stay in that cloud as much as possible, which is what neutral is. That's just one example of the circumstantial nature of her gameplay. Cassiopeia is extremely hard to play because it's not entirely clear what the best use case is for each ability, and the margin for error is very thin. She doesn't scale quite to the same level as Marksman at full power due to abilities not having things like crit chance on hit effects and whatnot, while other long-range mages can blow her up before she can even get a chance to walk up and attack, yet at the same time, her early game is quite punishable. She needs health and mana before she can really get going, meaning you have to make the mid game really count, as that's really the only point where she can excel, except the vast majority of mages scale in the mid game. She can deal a ton of damage but relies on poisoning the enemy first, except her Q and W are both positionally dependent and require careful consideration on where she might be in relation to her opponent to ensure the longest amount of poison uptime as possible. She's at her strongest when fighting one enemy at a time, yet doesn't have the necessary means to be a threatening duelist like mobility or get off me tools. Even though she has a very simple kit, there's a lot of micromanagement that goes behind playing her at a high level, at which point most players would rather just play someone more straightforward and dedicated. If you're playing to blow up enemy teams, you can play someone like Annie or Brandt. If you're trying to play someone with extreme single target pressure, you can play Twisted Fate, Veigar, or Malzahar. If you're looking for DPS, you can play Aurelion Sol, Victor, or Kayle. What they have that Cassio doesn't is a clear path. That's really what it boils down to in my opinion. Cassiopeia is a very ambiguous champion because of how incongruous her kit may feel. The very same thing that makes sense in one situation may not make sense in another one. That might explain why she's played mid lane but doesn't feel like a mid laner, she's played top but doesn't feel like a top laner, and occasionally she's played bot lane but doesn't feel like a bot laner either. Some games you want to play for side lane and just 1v1, other games you want to play for control and use W and ultimate as zoning pressure in teamfights. Some games you want to play aggressive and bully early, other games you want to wait for mid to late game. She's as good as you make her, but that ultimately makes her a slow burn champion. Her situation's reminiscent of Ivern or Quinn, where they almost always have a positive win rate and sometimes a very high one, but that's mostly because the only people who played them are those who got really good on them and invested hundreds of games on them. Altogether, Cassio is hard to play both micro and macro mechanically, and even if you do manage to get really good on her, the conflicting elements between her trying to be a control mage and marksman simultaneously, despite both fields having their own distinct forms of pressure, can make you feel like she's ill-suited for being either, forcing you to switch between being one or the other to get as much out of both halves as you can. But unlike other one-trick champs like Riven or Kassadin, where you can literally 1v9 games if you get good on them, it feels as if Cassio is hard capped at what she can do in practice, despite in concept having extremely powerful abilities. For a one-trick hyper carry, she's awfully dependent on item builds and matchups. That about sums up everything I have to say about her. She's less popular now compared to back then, likely as a result of there just being more straightforward champs with the same carry potential as her. But what do you guys think? Do you agree with my points, or do you think it might be something else? Feel free to share in the comments. For now, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you could leave a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and checking out my other Why No One Plays episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.